All right, so our first speaker today is, I guess I'm supposed to announce the topic of the panel, objectifying the Islamic object, from Ottoman silk flags to 12th century minbars to a 13th century brass tray with processional figures. And our first speaker will be Bernard O'Kane. Now I've known Bernard a long time, and it took me at least, a whole hour for him to teach me how to pronounce his name, but I hope I'm doing it correctly now. So Bernard O'Kane is professor of Islamic art and architecture at the American University of Cairo, where he's been teaching since 1980. He has also been a visiting professor at Harvard University and the University of California at Berkeley. He has numerous articles on a broad range of topics, as well as a number of monographs also on a broad range of topics. He just published an illustrated guide to the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo. Looks to be beautiful, but without further ado, Bernard, come on up.
Thank you for that introduction. On the left, you're looking at the minbar of the Jami al-Amri in Qus, dating from 1155 to 6, and on the right, at the minbar of the Jami Nuri at Hama, dating from just about 10 years later, 1163 to 4. The first is in Egypt, the product of a Fatimid patron, the second in Syria, commissioned by a Zangid patron. And each deserves a closer look, not only for their intrinsic artistic qualities, which are even more impressive than they have been given credit for, but also for what they reveal of trends in ornamentation at the time. The minbar in Qus was a gift of the Fatimid vizier al-Malik al-Salih al-La'ah, probably at the time of a major reconstruction by him of the mosque there. He had been governor of Qus and several other towns in Upper Egypt before his accession to the vizierate in 1154, which he maintained until his death in 1161. His predecessor in the vizierate, al-Abbas, had in 1154 engineered the death of the Caliph Az-Zafar and then put Az-Zafar's 5-year-old son in Faiz upon the throne. And so the outraged population invited Tala'ah to intervene, with the result that he was able to rule with almost complete autonomy. He was thus certainly able to commandeer the finest artisans for the major products of his reign, his mosques at Qus here, and also one that he built in Cairo. Priest Daven, whom we have heard about before today, was especially impressed with the Qus minbar, devoting no less than one complete plate, which you see on the left-hand side to it, and 5 details. One of the details is on the right-hand side. Here are another 2, and another 2 as well. And he was also able to draw it when it was ostensibly in a more intact state than it is now, showing it with doors, balustrades, and a dome, and they're no longer there. But fortunately, since the rest has survived virtually intact, we can use it as a control for the accuracy of those parts we have lost. Unfortunately, a close scrutiny quickly reveals Priest Daven's inconsistency in his rendering of details. In the spandrel of the entrance, for instance, it's clear that he regularized all the elements of the pattern, creating absolute symmetry, probably by reversing one side of his drawing, where the original shows variations in size and finish, normal and hand carving. Some of the differences may be due to the deteriorating condition of the wood, such as the pearl band that he shows, and which now in the original is almost lost, perhaps by repeated applications of paint or varnish. But more problematically, Priest Daven altered the proportions of the various elements, most noticeably towards the lower extension of these side areas. A comparison of his drawing of the side of the minbar with the original is even more cautionary. The angle of the stairs that coincides with the pattern, it's not one that matches exactly the basic hexagonal pattern of the lower part, which results in irregular geometric elements on the stair rail. Now, if you compare these, you can see, in fact, that Priest of Ven has completely fabricated the irregularities at this point. It's hard to think why, since this must have been much more difficult than just copying the original. The conclusion, I think, must be that many elements were drawn in great detail on the spot, while mere notes were made on other parts to be added later in the studio. More disturbing yet in this comparison is that above this area, the border that remains of the balustrade here seems to be original work. Yet it doesn't correspond at all with the border in Priest of Ven's drawing, raising the possibility that the elaborate balustrade of Priest of Ven is a complete fabrication. And it's a great pity, since parts of the drawing of the main pattern and the sides of the minbar are extremely accurate reproductions of what survives. But sadly, in other areas, there are so many inconsistencies that we should now be extremely cautious in accepting any of his work as clear evidence of what we are now missing. Another element that betrays Priest of Ven's work as emanating from the studio is the use of identically repeated patterns in the geometric elements of the sides of the minbar. The hexagon and six-pointed stars, you can see the hexagons here. Now, I've put this on its side, in fact, rotated at 45 degrees so that it will appear larger on the screen. So these are the basic elements of the design, which are surrounded in each case by 6 of these polygons. There are other various cartouches and irregular geometric elements. But you can see, in fact, if you look carefully, that, for instance, the 2 six-pointed stars have completely different fillings, and each of the polygons surrounding it have a completely different design as well. This is something that is missed, of course, in Priest of Ven's examples. So the carpenter or carpenters seem to be flaunting their innovation and imagination, where even the close variations serve as a call and response rather than as mere repetitions. And so even though the basic framework is hexagonal, for instance, we can see the incorporation of not just 6 and 12-sided stars, as you would expect, but also 5, 7, 8, 9, 14-pointed stars, and just adding for this to good measure, can be seen an 11-pointed star on the back of the seat of the minbar. The hexagon was also the starting point for the earliest dated woodwork to use intersect. Oh, sorry, just let me mention, by the way, that the quality of the individual panels when you enlarge them shows just how impressive the carving is, having an extra layer of arabesques on top of the first layer. The hexagon was also the starting point for the earliest dated woodwork to use intersecting geometric forms based on star patterns for the main design. This is the minbar commissioned by Badruddin al-Gamali for the shrine of the head of Hussein at Ascalon, dating from 1091 to 2, and which is now in Hebron or Al-Khalil. There, however, the area under the seat was separated by a border from that under the stairs, and it repeated itself in the main triangular part of the design. At Qus, the whole is a seamless composition. In both cases, the area under the seat is a geometric hole, but surprisingly, in both the horizontal extension of the pattern is cut off irregularly, not just by the balustrade, but also, in fact, at the front of the mihrab by an asymmetrical point in the pattern. The Qus minbar has been characterized for its use of geometric ornamentation as intrusive in the Fatimid oeuvre. So it's worth stressing what the research of some earlier major figures, Pauty and Garcin, also found, that it fits seamlessly into the series of the major works of the time. This is back to the overall photograph of the Qus minbar. And earlier examples of the same use of geometric ornamentation include the portable mihrabs of Sayyida Nafisa, with a design also based on a 6-pointed star at the center, running down either side. That dates from probably 1137 to 8 or 1146 to 7. And it's also present, again, based on a central six-pointed star in the portable mihrab of Sayyida Ruqayya, datable between 1154 to 60. Another example is the cenotaph of Al-Hussein, almost certainly datable to around 1150, which uses very extensive geometric ornamentation. And another example are the doors of Salat al-A'iz's own mosque in Cairo, dating from 1155 to 6, which has geometric ornamentation both on the back of the door in wood that you see here, stars, six-pointed and more elaborate, and also on the front of the door in a metal revetment. Another interesting link between the Qus Minbar and some of the Fatimid objects are the use of the cornucopia that you see here in their scrollwork. This is the Qus Minbar. There are examples here in the Sayyida Nafisa portable mihrab, and on the back of the Sayyida Ruqayya mihrab we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these cornucopia, a motif which is a revival which starts around this time. In addition, the pattern at the base of the seat of Qus that you see on the right here is one of six-point stars surrounded by irregular hexagons, and that is identical to that within the lower niche of the Sayyida Ruqayya portable mihrab. And yet another link with the Sayyida Ruqayya mihrab is a pattern on the top riser here from Qus of a reciprocal pern band of semicircles joined by a stepped motif. And this is found in one of the panels at the back of the Sayyida Ruqayya portable mihrab that you see at the top there. So despite its location of the Qus Minbar in what is now a provincial bywater, it's clearly a metropolitan product, as one would expect of its patron, the most powerful individual in Egypt at the time. The Minbar of Hama that you see here has been overshadowed by that ordered 5 years later by the same patron, Nuruddin, for the Aqsa Mosque, understandably given the poorer state of preservation of this example when they were initially studied. Its base has been lost, so this is not original, apart from the inscription that surrounds the balustrade here on one side. And one can only guess what the pattern there would have been, but it probably was something similar to this. But what remains still displays outstanding craftsmanship. Earlier, Herzfeld had commented eloquently on the two categories of arabesque there, one in which the shallow cut arabesques that you see here and here, this is from the inside at the top of the seat, this is from one of the stairs. They are separated by a geometric border resembling Samara C-type patterns. But there's another one in which a much deeper cut stems cross over and under the border that you see down here, and which he eloquently describes as a border which is no longer a boundary, but a melody running through a fugue. However, the artist was also aware of this distinction, placing the deep cut verses where in fact they're almost invisible from someone looking outside, they're inside, beside the dome there. But the arabesque that he was so eloquently referring to is found here, just below the seat. Here's a more detailed version of it corresponding with the drawing of Herzfeld himself. But pride of place, on what remains at least on the outer is the arabesque that is present on the outer spandrels of all three arches that are visible. It's yet a third kind of arabesque, one composed of deeply cut leafy stems crossing under and over one another, where the leaves often end in a curlicue, leading to a suggestion of a sphere, an almost three-dimensional reduction of the arabesque to its essential element. The motif is sometimes known conventionally as a Rumi arabesque, owing to its popularity in Anatolia, where Seljuk Quran stands, such as the one on the left, which is in the collection of the Islamic Museum in Berlin. They display some of its finest examples. But it's equally prominent in the Jazeera in the 12th to 13th centuries, appearing on this probably 12th century marble example, for instance. And it's also apparent in metalwork on the left-hand side on a geomantic tablet that is in the British Museum dating from 1241 to 2, and on this example from a museum collection probably of around the same date. Spherical elements are unusually prominent on the decoration of the minbar, appearing on the soffits of the arches, following the curve, just below the cornice of the inscriptions, in the mashrabeh work on the front and sides, and on the lobes of the palmettes that make up the crenellations. Let me just go back to show you those. You can see them on the general slide there. The cursive inscription that runs on three sides below the cornice consists of Quran 25:61 and part of 62, and it reads, "Blessed is he who made constellations in the skies and placed therein a lamp and a moon giving light, and it is he who made the night and day." Sylvia Old has argued with respect to the inscriptions chosen for Nuruddin's Aqsa Mosque that the light symbolism of the motifs, including its Quranic inscriptions, one of which was the Surat an-Nur, was deliberate. And this is surely the case here also, especially with its resonances with the name of Nuruddin, literally the light of religion. The cursive script shown at the back of the chair, it's extremely elegant, but it's not, as has been suggested, one that is characterized by interconnection. The dal and the ra and the sin of Rasul are in fact quite separate. One feature of the minbar that hasn't been mentioned before is the painting on the interior of the dome. It's certainly not as accomplished as the woodwork, and it shows many signs of having been substantially repaired. Could it be original? The design consists of a thin foliated scroll in black, almost like a Chinese waterweed, with irregular pentagons and, towards the bottom, irregular six-pointed leaves. Small circles are added in the lower areas, and connecting them in red is a loose arrangement of trefoils and abstract leaves. I haven't found any exact analogues in the same medium, but some of this almost the same similar thin foliated scrolls can be found in the background of the ceramics produced in Syria around at the same period. I apologize, I forgot to include a slide of this, so if you're not familiar with the material, you'll just have to take my word for it for the moment. But despite its extensive restoration, I think it's likely that at least the design is original. Although, as has been remarked, it's probable that a star-based pattern occupied the now missing part of the lower part of the minbar, the only geometric pattern that survives is this one, based on hexagons on the backrest, interrupted by the two cartouches with the Shahada. It's therefore not the case, as has been claimed by an earlier scholar, that interlaced geometric patterns are prominently displayed on it. And even if the missing lower section of the Hama minbar had a geometric design, its variety and prominent use of vegetal arabesques on its upper parts suggest that these were equally important. So what do these minbars and the associated pieces mentioned above tell us of the trends in ornamentation at the time? The idea of a dichotomy in the use of geometric ornamentation in the Islamic world in the 11th to 12th centuries was first propounded by Guru Najibullah, who suggested that it was to be associated with the legitimacy of the Seljuk successor states that revised the Abbasid Khutbah, and that, quote, geometric patterns were not typical of the predominantly vegetal Fatimid decorative vocabulary. The notion was taken further by other scholars who claimed that the Qus Minbar was intrusive in the Fatimid examples and that the Gurih mode was largely absent from Cairene imperial monuments, even if it had decisively made its way into sub-imperial monuments or those outside the capital. However, I think this is a distortion of imperial patronage under the Fatimids, since from the time of Badr al-Gamali onwards, as represented, for instance, in the north gates of the north wall and the gates of Cairo, the power of the vizier was just as important, and sometimes more so, than that of the nominal rulers, the Fatid imams. He, of course, was the patron of the Ascalon Minbar with the geometric decoration that I showed you earlier. And so the Ascalon and Qus Minbars made by viziers at the height of their power are fully representative, I would argue, of imperial Fatimid might, as much as the mihrabs of Sayyida Nafisa and Sayyida Ruqayya are in the capital, and as much as the doors of Asalat al-A'iz Mosque in Cairo are, all of which prominently display geometric patterns. So I would argue that from the examples that we have just been looking at, far from being intrusive in their oeuvre, the Fatimids were leaders in the development and use of geometric ornamentation, embracing it with enthusiasm before any other dynasty. So until any new literary evidence perhaps comes along for the theory of the ideological explanation for the use of geometry in Islamic art in this period comes along, it must remain on the basis of our present knowledge a chimera. Thank you.